Hey, this is former Blue Devil lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
Welcome back in Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast, August 15th, season previews. We're winding down finally. Got a few more teams left to preview. But today we are once again previewing another new ACC team. First time guest of the show, Billy Embody, joins me on theponyexpress.com covering SMU. Billy, welcome to the podcast. Can't say, I've said this with a couple other guests, as you can imagine. I was not expecting to do an SMU season preview at this time last year.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it was, we'll talk about realignment and how we got to this point, but seeing it actually come together was pretty surprising for me as well, just because SMU's been on this path for so long to a power conference and trying to get back to that level that you didn't know if it was ever really going to happen. So a nice surprise to be starting off the 2024 season in a Power 3 or 4 conference.
Yeah, again, this has just been a crazy time for realignment. I asked the beat writers for Stanford and Cal the same question that I'm about to ask you, and it's from your standpoint, right, when all the realignment stuff is swirling, and obviously, you know, the Pac-12 was in a more dire situation than the American, but when all of the conference realignment news was swirling, did you get a sense that SMU was going to get caught up in it as quickly as it did? Obviously, SMU was in a different situation, and you know, in so far as like almost like independently wealthy as far as college football programs go, with the booster base and that sort of thing. But did you get the sense that it was going to come together this quickly for SMU to land in a power conference like it did?
So SMU's been on this journey to get to a power conference for years. I mean, they did their presentation to the Big 12 back in 2013, 14, 15,
Yep.
whenever the Big 12 went through that exercise, and they ended up sticking at the number they were at that point. And during that time, SMU had Chad Morris. They kind of got back to relevancy there, started producing some draft picks like Cortland Sutton. And they were just kind of building. Larry Brown was the basketball coach. And then things kind of basketball-wise fell off. Football hired Sonny Dykes after Chad left for Arkansas, and it started to pick up. You know, they won 10 games. They had rankings in the top 25. And during that time, Sonny kind of pushed some of these boosters, hey, we need to start investing in facilities. We need to be on the right side of this realignment push. And then he left for TCU, and that really lit not only a fire, let's call it a bonfire under SMU. And that's when SMU became one of the early powers of NIL, and retained their whole roster. Sonny Dykes was trying to get all those players, for the most part, to come join him at TCU, and he held the school held that off with NIL. Their chairman of the board, David Miller, and some of their other key benefactors like Bill Armstrong and others started working their contacts in the ACC and the Pac-12. They took another run at the Big 12, and they said, how can we get in? What is the key? We've invested $250 million in football facilities in the last few years. By that point, the new end zone complex was underway. We've done this with facilities. We've done that with coaching salaries. We've done this with NIL. We have a fund that is, it was $30 million before SMU even got to the ACC, of money set aside for competitiveness in the power conference ranks. That was earmarked for that. So they went about all these different things. And SMU's in Dallas, a huge metroplex and growing city. So they took their pitch nationally. It looked like for a long time the Pac-12 was going to be the spot that they landed in. And then all hell broke loose there. And SMU never let up on the ACC. And behind closed doors, they felt like that was their best option, their best conference in terms of their fit with the other members. You know, you're talking about schools like Miami, Virginia, North Carolina, plenty of others that I'm forgetting that are like-minded in terms of SMU's want to be an elite university and
Right.
athletic program.
Right.
And so for those reasons, they felt like they fit truly best in the ACC. And they kept up the push on NC State in particular, and it paid off. And, the Big 12 was never going to let them in with schools like Baylor and TCU and Texas Tech.
Right.
They're not wanting SMU on a power conference level. And you can see why they didn't want that, because right away in the first week, SMU raises $100 million for the ACC Competitiveness Fund.
Yeah, I mean it was I think it was a natural fit for a lot of reasons. I mean, number one, geographically, like the Stanford and Cal fits do not make any sense whatsoever. And like, yeah, SMU is in Dallas, but it's not as crazy compared to these other schools that the ACC brought in. I understand there's other factors at play. Stanford and Cal, from an academic standpoint, they align to the Dukes and the North Carolinas and the Wake Forest of the world in the ACC. I do understand that. But the SMU fit from an athletic standpoint alone, with how the boosters have pushed athletics to the forefront there, and SMU is a school where I think it's like a mutually beneficial relationship, right, with SMU and the ACC, insofar as, like you mentioned, SMU has been pushing for a long time to get into a power conference. But number two, like, the ACC is really trying to keep their head above water in conference realignment anyway. SMU is one of those schools that brings a lot to the table on the football field, which is obviously driving all this right now anyway. They bring a lot to the table on the football field, a lot of money into the program, obviously. And then, when you have the Florida State and Clemson question here in the next year or two, and we'll see what happens there, for SMU, I feel like it almost, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you see this differently, I think for SMU, as far as like the conference realignment wins go, I feel like SMU will be okay, right? Wherever they end up, if they end up in a group of five situation again, like the ACC fell apart and SMU's looking for a new home, they still have all the money that they can invest in athletics. I think boosters would be more motivated, obviously, if they were in a power conference, but I feel like they would be okay. And they're one of the few schools, I think, in the entire FBS that no matter kind of which direction the realignment winds take the sport, SMU is the one school that's always going to have the money behind it, where if you float over here, that's okay. If you end up over here, that's fine too. Let me know what you think of that thought that I had. But I've had that thought on it for a while, just because I know how the boosters contribute to SMU at the G5, and then obviously we've seen the impact when they get into a power conference, how much more money they'll put into the football program.
Yeah, it's as somebody who's reported on it for a long time and was saying throughout the process, look, the Pac-12 is what appears most likely, but don't sleep on the ACC option. It's real. That's where I think you kind of validated some of my reporting just with that thought from a ACC perspective. Like, this is a school that you can look around the country at programs that carry stadium debt or facility debt, or aren't firing coaches because they don't have enough money, or do this or do that, that isn't up to a level of commitment that aligns with like look, there's only so many Alabama, Oregon, Texas, those level of spending. And SMU isn't there because they've been building to this. They don't have a gluttonous athletic department with tons of different titles and people. They've kind of run lean. And so for those reasons, they can grow and keep spending, which they are. They expanded their athletic department. But the money behind this program, now that they're in a power conference, will always be there. It will keep growing, because now that people have that taste of even being in the club, that commitment is always going to be there. SMU doesn't build facilities without having the money in place, which they get rather quickly. They don't do things like cutting corners. Their indoor is red brick all the way around. That added probably $20 million to the cost. Some schools, just to say they have one, get the erector set up and it's done. And that's just where SMU's at. They spend, and it was funny. The ACC network was here for their ACC preseason kickoff, where
Yep.
they broadcast live from practice and things like that. And Eric McLean, Taylor Tannenbaum, EJ Manuel went around campus, and I think this is going to be for most ACC folks that maybe haven't been to SMU. They were pretty shocked at just how meticulously kind of perfect campus is. There's
Right.
some construction going on because they just keep building and renovating buildings and all those things, but it's a campus that really wows you.
Yeah.
Even if it's, you can walk from the top to the bottom in 15 minutes, 20
Right.
minutes, it's not a UNC or things like that or Florida State, but it's just a school that does everything the right way, and they spend and spend and spend. And each year they get more, I would say, information on what that type of spending at the power conference level looks like.
Right.
Just each year they just add different nuances and different benefits to these coaches and and the athletic department as a whole and the student athletes, and it just keeps growing. So, they want to be competitive. They don't just want to be in the club. And I think that's the biggest difference for some schools that are maybe, not the biggest athletic powers, but are just, again, kind of just happy to be in the club.
I think that's perfectly put. I think that's why SMU is kind of uniquely positioned in conference realignment. So landing in the ACC, I think, is certainly interesting. Rhett Lashley, we're familiar with him in the ACC. Obviously, SMU had the familiarity with him when he came back to the program, but familiar with him in the ACC from his time at Miami, and he ends up back at SMU after being the offensive coordinator there. Wow, 5 or 6 years ago now already. It's his third year. Things looking pretty good. Team was great last year. Won the American, right? Beat a good Tulane team. Beat them in the AAC title game. 11-3 year. This is a program that I feel like entering the ACC, entering the Power 5 or Power 4, I guess. They're in a position where they can be competitive right away, and I think the natural question, because we've seen this in the Big 12 with a Cincinnati or a UCF. We've seen a Group of 5 team recently, right, make the jump to the P5, and it's been kind of met with mixed results. But I also feel like, looking at SMU's roster, like those other teams, when they made the jump to the P5, didn't necessarily have the roster that SMU is returning with all of this production. And you mentioned the NIL playing a significant factor a couple years ago when Sonny Dykes left. But this is a roster that looks real good on paper. And I feel like that's where SMU may be a different kind of story, right? Making the jump from the G5 to the P5. So, I mean, what's your take on that in terms of the roster construction and the recent struggles we've seen from other schools making that jump?
Yeah, the interesting thing with SMU is just how much, I think, over the last couple of years they've invested in defensive linemen and offensive linemen and trying to build that up. Now, going into this season, the defensive line is, in my opinion, the strongest position on the team. It is the deepest, pretty sure, and they have an opportunity to really play with anybody at a high level,
Yeah.
and that includes Florida State. That doesn't mean SMU is going to go out and beat Florida State,
Right.
all those things, but they have a 3 deep they feel really comfortable with, and at least leaving fall camp is healthy. They have Elijah Roberts, who was a star in the AAC and knows the ACC as well. They have power conference transfers at every single position, guys who have started. Jared Harrison Hunt's going to start at the 3 tech. He was a starter for Miami. Florida State wanted him badly. I didn't realize even how close Florida State was on that until FSU fans were ticked in the mentions when SMU snapped him up. Farai Harvey started for Miami on the edge. Jonathan Jefferson was a former blue chip recruit who played at Georgia. He's going to surprise people this year. Tank Booker's a big nose tackle from Arkansas and Maryland. They have Corey Roberson, who came in last year from Oklahoma. They really feel comfortable with their edge position with Harvey and Isaiah Smith, who is another highly touted prospect who had some offers out of the DMV area. They just really go deep at defensive line, and that's where, at least from my loose following of some of the other teams that have made the jump, That's the
Yeah.
difference that could be there with SMU. And they obviously returned Preston Stone. They returned Kevin Jennings, two quarterbacks that have gotten a lot of experience and have won some games for SMU. But they really have to figure out the offensive line, and they do have some injuries that are they're from camp in one instance to the right tackle at Andrew Chamblee. So they have moved a guard to right tackle right now. They have Logan Parr, who's actually their highest rated player on the college football game, playing left guard, but he is coming back from a shoulder injury, so they might be just a little slow with him in the early going. But they have PJ Williams, who's going to be a really good left tackle for them. They think Justin Osborne is going to be outstanding at center. Ja'Kai Clark started 40-plus games for Miami at right guard. So they have some talent. They have some depth. And the offense has to put together all of the different things that they couldn't last year. They didn't have a number one receiver step up. They had a wide receiver by committee group, but they also have RJ Maryland, who's a star at tight end. They have a deep running back room that has some talent, needs to get more consistent. So the defense returns a ton just at all three levels. They have questions at cornerback. The offense returns a lot as well, but they, in their games against strong competition, weren't exactly world beaters last year. So that was a first-year starting quarterback. We'll see how it goes this year with the step up in competition as well for Preston Stone.
Yeah, and I'm pulling something up. My co-host Joey, who's of course on the podcast today, because he's I didn't mention this to you at the beginning, but he just recently had his third child, so that's why it's just me flying solo.
I'm a new dad too, so that's
okay. Very, very cool, very cool. Yeah, he just had his third child. You're a new dad. I've got a 2-year-old, so I think we got the bases covered on kids. SMU. I mean, if you're just looking at SP plus rank, there are a number of teams that they rolled through last year. And out of the 11 wins, Joey pointed out, 8 of them were against teams rated worse than Wake Forest, right? So we're talking about like the jump in competition. Wake Forest obviously didn't have a very good year last year. So I think we're going to find out quickly. But I think the point you made that's really important is SMU feels good about the depth in the trenches. And usually I just run through, with these previews, I run through quarterback, running back, wide receiver. I just like go down the list. But you hit on it a little bit. Offensive line and defensive line, I kind of want to get into those more right now. Offensive line, I know there are a few all-conference players off of the line, but I know they hit the portal hard. And then I know you mentioned some of the portal additions on the defensive line. Is that going to be, in your opinion, especially on the offensive line, is that going to be enough, or do you think the continuity is going to take some time? How are they looking in camp in terms of what they brought in, and how should SMU fans feel about the offensive line unit in particular?
Yeah, the offensive line, they brought in a ton, just both in terms of guys that they feel like can start and contribute. Nate Anderson from Oklahoma was kind of viewed as a depth guy. They brought him in. He's now probably going to start at right tackle, but they have Andrew Chamblee, an all-SEC freshman from Arkansas who's recovering from an injury. He's going to be at some point back and take on that right tackle spot. Then you have Savion Byrd, who also came in from Oklahoma, a Dallas native, and is a blue chip prospect. He played some for Oklahoma, couldn't exactly really kick the door down and become elite at left guard for the Sooners. Right. He experimented at right tackle for the spring and then into fall camp, and they realized, you know what, this isn't working. Yeah. We're going to move him back to left guard. With Logan Parr coming back and needing some time, it's actually worked out really well when they stuck him back there. So there are concerns, I think, like you said, from the continuity perspective.
Yeah.
But Justin Osborne at center replaces Branson Hickman, who went to Oklahoma. And right there, you have a massive upgrade in athleticism. And I think that's going to be really important when dealing with some of these impressive defensive and interior tackles from some of these ACC schools. Branson played a lot of good football for SMU, especially at the AAC level. I think when he had to deal with some bigger, stronger guys, it kind of pushed him back a little bit, and it just didn't go so well. Right. And then at left tackle, you have Marcus Bryant, who's a really good pass protector, but maybe struggled a little bit in run blocking. they feel like they upgraded athletically with PJ Williams, and he is a little bit more of a stronger guy. He's less finesse.
Yep.
So maybe they might lose just a touch there in pass protection, but they feel like they upgraded the run blocking. And then Ja'Kai Clark is a fire hydrant. He's a really strong kid at right guard who's played a ton of football between center and right guard. So they feel like they have a lot of pieces. It's going to take, they open up against Nevada, and then they play Houston Christian at home, and then they get BYU on a Friday night.
Yep.
Those 3 games are going to be critical to setting the table for that offensive line, maybe getting things settled down, knowing what they have, and then if they need to make any drastic changes for that game against TCU and stretch with TCU, FSU, Louisville, they can do that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and we'll get into the schedule here in a bit, but that's one thing I thought of too. It's like, well, at least SMU has a little bit of a runway to get some of the kinks ironed out early on. I'm looking at some of these other ACC schedules I've been doing these previews. I'm like, man, some of the schools are just thrown into the fire right away with new units, especially up front. Preston Stone, I mean, fantastic year last year, kind of burst on his scene, really, really good. It's really hard to get a gauge. Like, if you're an ACC fan listening to this podcast, it's really hard to every Saturday go outside the conference and be like, outside of like the really, really elite schools, and be like, all right, where's the good quarterback play at? But if there was one quarterback, and I write for SI, Billy, and I watch a lot of college football. If there was one guy outside of the power conferences last year who was appointment viewing a quarterback, it was Preston Stone, right? Fantastic year. Comes back. It's hard to imagine him getting even better than he was last year, and it's hard to believe he's only a junior. But I mean, SMU fans got to be feeling pretty good about, and Rhett Lashley especially, has got to be feeling pretty good about what he brings back in the quarterback room.
Yeah, and this is a hot button issue, I would say, because Preston started out learning on the job. First year starting quarterback, first 6 games, the offense was not good, especially comparatively to what Red is used to doing in terms of production and all of those things. And there were some moments, like you said, in the data where SMU ended up facing, over the course of its schedule, some pretty weak competition. And Preston balled and made a lot of plays, and the offense, got cooking, and it built a lot of confidence. They were able to go to Memphis, play really well, especially in the second half offensively, and get it done. Their first win in Memphis in like a decade or something like that. Punched their ticket to play Tulane in the championship game. And then Preston gets hurt against Navy while on pace to set the single game passing record, mind you. He wouldn't have played the whole game, but still, that type of a performance for him. And that has now led to Kevin Jennings getting opportunities against Tulane and BC. Mixed results, moved the offense, also threw some interceptions. Had them in position to beat BC, a dropped wide open touchdown pass. That game maybe changes. And at the same time, you're taking this massive step up in competition. And this is where I think there's, like you said earlier, we're going to find out really quickly. Whether it's going to be Preston's show and it's, wow, he's taken the next step, he's the second year starter, cool, things are going to roll. Or is this something we're going to have to watch between Preston and Kevin really closely? And I asked Casey Woods, the offensive coordinator, Rhett calls the plays, but Casey Woods is doing an interview. I said, how do you handle both? Because both have played, both have tools. You guys have seen some success with both. And, he basically said that he didn't know who was going to run out there against Nevada. Now, I have my opinion that it's going to be Preston Stone, but it speaks to how confident they are in that quarterback room. And someone else asked him, well, is a decision made? Are you, where is this at? And they want to evaluate these 2 guys. So I bet you in the first 2 games, both are going to play, and they'll be able to whittle down their decision a little bit more. And we'll get some clarity, I think, by the time the end of the BYU or end of the TCU game, as far as who's going to lead them into conference play. It's not as much a quarterback controversy as much as it is, you do have 2 guys that do a lot of things really well. And while you don't want to lose either one, and by riding with one, and you don't want to tick off both by playing this little game. They're both
Right.
really mature. They both get it. Preston's been hurt the last 2 years, and
Yep.
Kevin has had to play.
Yep.
And so all of those things are just kind of factoring into this. I don't know how to even describe where the quarterback position at SMU stands. It's in a really good place, but there's
Yeah.
also a little bit of unknown with this step up in competition because, Preston and Kevin both had mixed results at times against the better competition.
I think that's fair. Looking at the second half of last year, it's easy to, from an outsider, right, to be enthralled by everything that Preston Stone was able to do. And he throws for 3,200. He's an all-conference player. He was fantastic in the AAC title game. Again, two really high-level quarterbacks at the Group of Five level, right, and Michael Pratt and Preston Stone in that conference title game. That's interesting. That's going to be something to watch. So it's not. Well, that would be a really bad pun. Not set in stone, right? It's not set in stone.
There we go. I haven't used that yet. Dang it.
There you go. You have it.
Yeah.
Just came to me. So I will see there. Running back room, Jalen Knighton, again, another guy ACC fans are very familiar with. You have Jalen Knighton. You have LJ Johnson back. Running back room, another area where SMU, I feel like, is in a really, really good place entering the year.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they have a lot of talent there, and they're just looking for consistency. They're looking for a guy to step up and be that hot hand. They haven't necessarily been able to find that out, whether it be Jalen Knighton's getting suspended for one game, LJ Johnson getting nicked up in like the back half of the non-conference slate, and that affecting him. You had Tyler Levine, who's a workhorse. He's now gone. Kamar Wheaton's hurt in fall camp. He's going to be out for a while. And he's shown flashes but not been consistent. So they have these guys that are back that have an opportunity to step up. And they also brought in Brashard Smith from Miami, super explosive player.
Yep.
And they have a freshman they like in Derek McFall, who's made some plays in fall camp. So the running back position is super interesting. I do think they added some explosiveness, but that's a position that is totally wait and see for me on two reasons. One, we'll see how the offensive line looks from a athletic, perspective where they've added all of these pieces and they have to have it come together in the run game, which they haven't. And then you also haven't had the consistent play from the running backs either. So they do have a new running backs coach in Kyle Cooper and assistant running backs coach Tyler Foster, which that new rule with analysts and QCs being able to coach on the field really helps. So they're working that position hard, and they're hoping to see it pay off this fall for sure.
Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They've got t-shirts, they've got sweatshirts, they've got hoodies, they've got a short sleeve coach hoodie if you want to look like Coach Key. They've got onesies for babies. They've got all things for any man, woman, children, something for the whole family, all the Georgia Tech fans in your life. They need something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. You can go get t-shirts supporting NIL efforts with guys like Haynes King and Zach Pyron. They've got shirts supporting the basketball team, the baseball team, the volleyball team, all sorts of wonderful Tech traditions, all sorts of things. Again, any Georgia Tech fan in your life, they need something from Section103.com. Once again, use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. I particularly love the Feliz Bobby Dodd sweatshirts. We got Christmas season coming up before you know it. You're going to want one of those for your holiday party. Go get it all at Section103.com. Huge shout out to Steven and the gang. Thank you so much to them for their support of the Basketball Conference podcast. We would love it if you guys would go show your support for Section103.com as well. Now, back to the episode.
The receiving core, it's a lot of guys. I mean, RJ Maryland at tight end kind of highlights the pass catchers, first team all AAC last year. Obviously, it's a stud. You mentioned his name earlier. Receiving core is kind of just a bunch of experienced guys, right? I think it's like top 6 or 7 pass catchers all back. A lot of returning production. Is this a situation much like the running back room where outside of RJ Maryland, you're looking for a guy to just like step up and be the guy, like the go-to guy in the receiving core?
Yeah, you are, in my opinion, at least. I mean, I respect the whole, we've got 6 receivers that can really do it. You know, they can make plays and all of that. But I just think Rhett Lashley's offense is at its best when he has a really good tight end, which he has, And they really like Matthew Hibner from Michigan, who transferred in. He's much more athletic than really they even thought. That's going to lead to some 12 personnel that I think could be really nice for SMU. But with the other receivers, last year it was kind of, you had Moochie Dixon, who was back, who was pretty athletic. He got hurt, broke his finger, played through it, just couldn't produce like you would hope he would have. You had Keyshawn Smith and Romello Brinson, who came in from Miami, familiar with the offense, but hadn't been as consistent. That was kind of the knock on them coming in. And then you had Jordan Hudson, who came in as a 5-star wide receiver transfer from TCU, and he was just young. And he co-led the team in touchdowns, receiving touchdowns. And, I feel like someone there is going to step up.
Yeah.
And, I mean, my early bet would be on a Jordan Hudson. I just think he's so physical. He's so competitive. And Romello Brinson's had a really nice offseason camp. At the outside receiver positions, getting that step up in production would be huge.
Yeah.
And the slots, Jake Bailey and Roger Daniels, two pretty different players, but really, really good. And again, just got to find consistency. And I think with Preston being back as quarterback, with Kevin being back, whoever's in there is going to have a pretty good rapport with these guys.
Yeah.
And they've worked it a lot more than last year. And I think there's a little bit of a chip on the shoulder of those wide receivers as well. So we'll see how that pans out. But again, that's where this whole offense is. It's, can you step up? Can you take your game to the next level? Can you do it at a higher level of competition? And somebody needs to make that happen.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And again, it's one of those units you watch. It's like, okay, how do the skill position guys stack up and to step up in competition, right? That's one of the key questions, obviously, outside of how this team handles things in the trenches. We talked about the offensive line. We got into the defensive line, the number of transfers coming in. The linebacking core is filled with all conference players. Kobe Wilson, Ahmad Walker, all AAC guys coming back. First year in a power conference, having two really proven linebackers has to be gigantic, especially with at least having some questions up front, some uncertainty up front with the defensive line. Knowing that you have a really good linebacking core has to settle the nerves a little bit, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and it's funny. I have been asked to host some Q&As with players or whatever through one of the collectives. And one of the events, we had Kobe Wilson there, and I was interviewing him, and he said, yeah, some people were sleeping on the linebackers last year. I was like, I just raised my hand. Like, I wasn't sleeping. I just didn't know what you guys could do. You were a question. Now it's not a question.
Right.
Ahmad Walker played a lot for Scott Simons when he was at Liberty. Came in and did exactly what they hoped. Steady, really good linebacker. And then Kobe Wilson was kind of like a late toss-in transfer from Temple. And he had played some. He played a bunch of football, but hadn't really taken the starting job. And he became one of the best defensive players for SMU. Really made a ton of key plays. Is just a short thumper, basically.
Yeah.
And Alex Kilgore is a returning sophomore that they feel incredible about. He actually started the season opener and then ended up playing a bunch of football for them. Brandon Maiazono is another sophomore who played a bunch on special teams, was playing a lot at the end of the year, defensive snaps. They just feel great about that linebacker group. They added Justin Medlock from Utah over the summer, and then they brought in Brandon Booker as a true freshman. Zach Smith is a true freshman. But Booker is really making a push to start in that second group and trying to battle his way in there to make it happen.
Feeling good about linebackers. Secondary, you're losing some proven guys at corner. Chris Megginson gone. Charles Wood's gone. All AAC player. You add in Deuce Harmon, right, from A&M. That's obviously a good addition out of the portal. A lot of experience in the safety room. Cornerback seems thin. Is that fair to say? At least in terms of proven commodities.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it is thin in proven commodities, like you said, and they brought in Deuce Harmon, who started for Texas A&M on a good defense.
Yeah, for sure.
They have Jalen Davis Robinson, who they really love his speed, love his development trend. AJ Davis, another younger corner, has really stepped up in fall camp as well. Jahari Rogers is a veteran. They moved nickel Brandon Crosley over to corner to really kind of help push that room in the right direction. And they feel like I don't want to call it a complete Band-Aid because Brandon Crosley's played a lot of football. Deuce Harmon's played in the SEC. They like
Right.
some of the younger guys, but the cornerback group is like the linebackers last year. They have questions.
Right.
It looks good on paper in a way. Deuce
Yeah, right.
Harmon with some of the skins he has on the wall. Jalen Davis Robinson, he's an incredibly fast player. AJ Davis is really taking some steps. Brandon Crosby's played a ton of football, but will it hold up against some of these really terrific athletes that SMU is going to see in the ACC, likes of Florida State, Louisville, and some of those other teams that run out some gazelles out there at wide receiver? That's going to be the challenge for them, and it's going to have to be a show me position. But on the flip side, the safety group is terrific. CJ Sanders might be the best safety on the team, and he's probably the least talked about. He played nickel last year, and he took that role and just held on to it and immediately made an impact coming in from Fresno State. He's got that spot on lock. Jonathan McGill, a former Stanford captain, is in his second year with SMU now. Ahmad Moses has a lot of buzz around him as another year with him. Isaiah Wakobi is back. He was the defense. He was the game MVP for the AAC championship. So they've got some studs back there at safety. They've added some nice pieces there as well. They feel great about that room. And so I think if the corners find themselves, this defense has a chance to be top 20, top 25.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way. I mean, if the cornerbacks play as well as the linebackers did last year with all the question marks entering the season, I think SMU is going to be in a pretty good spot. That's the defensive line can only be so bad with the experience that was added. That's more of a continuity thing versus a talent thing, I feel like, up front. So I think SMU should be feeling pretty good overall about the defense, especially if the cornerbacks pan out. I got to ask about Colin Rogers. It's been hit or miss on the previews with if I touch on special teams or not. I know Colin Rogers was really, really good as a true freshman. I know last year he was okay, 20 of 27 on field goals. How does the fan base view him? He was an all-conference player a couple years ago, and I know last year was kind of a mixed bag. Do they feel like they're pretty comfortable in the kicking game? Because I feel like SMU could be in some games here, right, in the ACC with a step up in competition. They're kind of tight. You're going to have to hit a few field goals. How does the fan base feel about Rogers? I feel like I have to ask that question given the state of things.
He started out poor, and he had an off season where I believe he had, I don't know if he had back surgery or was dealing with something all off season, and he actually sat out the spring prior, so I guess almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, and
it just kind of affected him, I think, early on, and then towards the end of the year, he was hitting some long field goals. It's funny. He would, I think if I'm remembering right, he would like miss one here or there where you're like, I can't believe this. And then he would go out and drill like a 47 or 49 yard field goal. So things are on the up with Colin Rogers. He's been a guy that has just faced a little adversity. Now he's kind of on the right path, I think, a little bit more with things. So they feel good. He's just, again, got another one of those guys that just needs to take the step in the right direction.
Will be interesting to watch. He's a college kicker, right? It happens.
Yeah.
He's a college kicker. Let's take a look at the schedule. We touched on it a bit earlier with like the opening 3 games. I feel like that's really, really crucial. I've seen SMU win totals float around at like 8.5, and I feel like it's really important for them to pick up not only the first 3 games but the first 4 to make that happen. TCU after the bye, I feel like, is crucial. But SMU is going to be favored in each of these first 3 games, given what BYU's returning or lack thereof. At Nevada, home against Houston Christian, home against BYU on a Friday before a bye week. Then you get into the really tough stretch of the schedule, and we'll talk about in a second. But these first 3 games I feel like are must-haves, and then that TCU game is obviously huge for so many different reasons, from Sonny Dykes to it being just a traditional rival in Texas. I feel like you got to go 4-0 out of the gate, and that TCU game is obviously no gimme because I do think they're going to be better than they were a year ago.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see how SMU plays against TCU. Out of all the non-conference games, like, you should beat Nevada, you should beat Houston Christian, obviously,
right?
And then BYU missed a bowl. They're just kind of a different team than maybe they were 2 years ago when SMU played them, when SMU was a very different team. Didn't
Right,
have
agree.
the defense and all those things. If you can get through all of those, you get a bye, then you play TCU, plays UCF the week prior, and I mean that's a game where that one's going to be interesting just for TCU, conference game for them. Then they got to come over to SMU and play the Mustangs, which haven't been able to break through under Rhett Lashley and beat Sonny Dykes yet.
Right. Yep.
And that's kind of like in the back of my mind trying to figure out that game. And I almost lean towards, well, I got to pick TCU just because of the way the two games have played out.
Right.
And the first one between Sonny and Rhett, TCU raced out to a big lead and kind of held off a late push. SMU had it down to a one-possession game, was forcing TCU to punt the ball away with a couple minutes to go, and they jumped over the long snapper. TCU gets a first down, game's over.
Yeah.
And it was so close to being potentially a dramatic comeback. But the next game this past year, they came out and they drove right down the field, and I believe they kicked a field goal, and it was just kind of like, really, on the road? And that kind of set the tone, and TCU stayed aggressive. They stayed after SMU, and they outplayed SMU kind of start to finish in that one, and outcoached them as well. So which SMU team are you going to get? Are you going to get the one that finished strong against Memphis, Tulane, and they're both different football teams in terms of talent and all of those things. SMU's completely changed their defensive line, and the defensive line last year was the strength of the defense already. They've added to it. TCU has faced a lot of injuries already with the offensive line. They faced some cornerback injuries as well. And in my opinion, they might know who's going to start game one, Josh Hoover.
Yeah.
But that TD-INT ratio, by game 4, I don't know who's going to start.
Yeah, a little dicey last year. Yeah, a little dicey.
Yeah, and same goes for SMU. It could be Preston, it could be Kevin, but this is a game that, on paper, if SMU is the team that Vegas thinks is set at 8.5 wins,
Yep.
if TCU is a team that, yes, looking to bounce back from missing a bowl, but isn't receiving an AP vote at all,
right?
Just right there, this is the game SMU should win.
Right.
And that's not me. That's nationally.
Right.
SMU's receiving votes. TCU is not.
Yep.
Like, you've got to step up and win this game. And while it has zero impact on, obviously, the league play, it is such a feather in the cap opportunity for Rhett Lashley.
It is.
And most fans obviously care about this game. Most fans, in my opinion, would take winning the ACC and giving up a loss to TCU.
Right.
But that it still comes with, they need to play better. And it can really lay the groundwork for what could be a competitive game against Florida State, what could be a competitive game against Louisville. If they come out and get maybe beat up and embarrassed in Ford by TCU, maybe that shows us a little bit more about this team that maybe we didn't realize. But it's going to be a tough one and hard fought. It is Sonny Dykes' Super Bowl at this point. I mean, just the way he has had them prepared the last 2 years, you've got to give him a lot of credit.
Yeah.
And, they didn't play very well last year after that game. So it's a big game for Rhett Lashley, but of course the conference slate starts tough and then gets a little bit better throughout.
I think it's the most important game on the schedule for so many different reasons, right? The optics you mentioned, right? Going into league play, optics of the program in their first year in the ACC, the fact that Sonny Dykes has had SMU's number the last 2 years, right? As their prior coach, that's a tough pill to swallow, right, for SMU fans. I understand that. And the fact that you mentioned it, SMU on paper looks like the better team. So if you drop that game, it's like nationally, folks are going to be like, all right, we got another G5 school, and fair or not, we have another G5 school that's struggling to make a jump. And it's going to, and that's before you even play a conference game. That's going to be the narrative that starts hopping up. You know what I mean? I mean, we know how these things go in the media. Very, very interesting game. Florida State at Louisville, the two toughest games outside of TCU. I think Florida State and Louisville are both better than TCU, and you have these 3 weeks in a row. But then after that second bye on October 12th, this is where you get into the very interesting part in the schedule, because I feel like on paper, SMU is better than Stanford, they're better than Duke, they're better than Pitt, they're better than BC, they're better than Virginia, and they're better than Cal. They are, on paper, in my opinion, better than the 6 remaining games on their schedule. But we keep bringing it up, first year in a power conference, we're going up against Pitt's defensive front. We're going up against a feisty Stanford team in their first year in the ACC. We're going up against a Boston College defense that should be a little bit improved. We're going up against a Cal team that's bringing back a lot in the front seven. It's like
dark horse Heisman trophy guy there.
Right. So
yeah.
Okay, that's where you throw your hands up, and it's
they
okay.
could go 3-3, and it wouldn't shock me. They can go 1-5, and the people would be ticked, and rightfully so, in my opinion. But first year, they could go 6-0.
Right.
I mean,
right.
They could.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a total. You got to drop your preseason predictions. I said 8-4.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think right now I can't pick SMU to beat TCU because Sonny's had the number. Do I think SMU should beat them? Yeah. I think that's the next step of this program, but they've got to show it. They haven't yet, and that's the hard part of obviously picking games. And then you get into the schedule. Okay, that means they lose. I guess that means I have them going 5-1 in league play.
Right.
So,
very well.
I don't know where the drop off comes from and where they maybe miss the mark. But I don't know. I mean, they really have an opportunity to make that final push. And I'll say this about Rhett Lashley's teams. Each year he's been at SMU, I believe they've lost – I think they've lost one game in November the last 2 years overall. Yeah. And I think they finished his first season maybe 5-2 in their last 7. Last year they went undefeated in AAC play. I mean, they finished. They are a team that, at least depth-wise, and we'll find this out,
right,
appears built to outlast a season of attrition.
And if not, they'll know where to put their NIL money.
Yep,
right?
Exactly.
They'll know
exactly.
quickly.
And Casey Woods talked about this on Wednesday as well. They do something that I think most staffs probably do, but they are after their BYU game, they've got bye.
Yep.
And they're going to sit down and basically plan for 2025 and look at every single player that'll be on the roster, and they're going to do their depth chart.
Yeah.
Their first depth chart for 2025. And they're going to say, okay, we feel good here. We feel good there. And then guess what? They're probably going to do it again after they play Louisville when they have that bye. And then they're really going to know, okay, all right, we got to dump all of our resources into X position, Y position.
Right.
We can't let this fall down a little bit. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolution comes for SMU. But I tell you what, people are excited. SMU fans want to welcome all their ACC new friends, I guess, that will come to Dallas. It's a fun place to check out the boulevard and just walk down the main boulevard, stop by tents, introduce yourselves. People will probably throw you a beer or whatever cocktail they got going. And it's a fun place to watch a college football game, and just kind of start to finish. It's a smaller, intimate stadium, but it's a great campus, and I think with the ACC, the crowds are going to be really, really good as well.
A lot of the ACC schools travel well. I'm a Virginia Tech alum. Our fan base travels incredibly well. I'm telling you, the first time SMU is on the schedule, Virginia Tech fans will be down there.
2028 for Blacksburg. Pumped. Ready.
You are going to love it. You're going to love it. It's it's a great college town. Yeah,
I've heard.
Great college town. You mentioned the where to put the NIL funds. They figure it out up front. They're already pushing Like they know early we got to get better in the trenches. I think that's really important. You said 8-4. I'm going to go 8-4 too. I don't know where the slip ups are. TCU's a toss up. I think Florida State and Louisville on paper will be really tough. So that's 3, right? And then not guaranteed losses, but tougher games on paper. And then whether it's Stanford or Pitt or Cal, I feel like there's another slip up in there. But I do think where SMU is positioned as one of those teams that's like 5th or 6th best team in the conference, I think that's really fair. I think they're right in the middle of the ACC with a chance to do more. I think kind of where they're pegged is totally fair in their first year in a power league. And I think they have a chance to surprise some people. And then if not, like this ends up being more like a 6 or 7 win season, I don't think it's the end of the world for SMU. I know fans would be disappointed with that, but I think the overall trajectory of the program is in a really good place. You'll know where to dedicate, time and space and funds on your roster moving forward. I think overall long term, SMU is in a really, really good place. I'm really, really interested to see how they perform in year 1. So that's where I'm at.
Yep, it's going to be interesting. I'm going into it just let the bullets fly and see how it goes, and we're going to learn a lot. It's hard to project the step up,
right?
But as somebody who's been out at every practice, gotten to see a lot of this team, they are in the trenches, especially defensively, and I keep harping on it. They are different, and they are very comparable to good Power 3-4 teams.
It's a good sign.
And if that turns out to not be true, then you know what? All right, that just shows even more how much they've got to step up. But they have depth, they feel like, and they have talent at all those spots, and that could very well carry this team to be in, because playing good defense, you can really be in a bunch of games.
Agreed.
And that's different than, you could have an offense that's averaging 35, 42, getting into that range. But if you can't play defense, you're in a shootout every time. If your offense slips up, you're gonna go 4-8.
There are a lot of good offenses in the ACC. There's a lot of really mediocre offenses in the ACC. If you play defense, and the one thing we've kind of touched on but haven't, I think Rhett Lashley having the experience in the ACC and knowing what it takes, I think is huge. And I don't think that's being talked about enough. Just kind of knowing what rosters look like, being at Miami, understanding the types of opponents you're going up against in the trenches, I think that's huge for SMU. Not only this year, but moving forward. Billy, really appreciate it, man. Want to give you an opportunity to plug where you're at, all your stuff.
Yeah, you can follow us at ontheponyexpress.com, and we've got a podcast over there as well. So check it out wherever you follow your podcast at.
Billy Embody, appreciate it, buddy. Thanks for jumping on.
Anytime, Mike. Thanks for having me.
We'll be back. More season previews, almost through all of them. Twitter at BC Podcast ACC, YouTube.com/@the ACC Football Podcast. We'll be back soon. Until then, go ACC.